Welcome to the next episode of DDR, a podcast all about your favorite Drow, Drizzt Do'Urden. My name is Justin, and in this episode, we'll be diving deep into Chapter 13 of Homeland, titled The Price of Winning, and discussing all of our favorite plot points, characters, and more.
And my name is Jeffrey. I'm the other half of this hosting duo. We're huge fans of Dungeons & Dragons, so one of the things that we like to do is delve into a part of the chapter and see how it relates to the tabletop game. Remember, we do it for 5e because that's what we're familiar with.
Yep. Following along with the show is easy. Just grab a copy of the book, read the next chapter, and tune in every week. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you're notified when the next episode is live. But how could you forget? All of our episodes air at 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. That's when they're posted. Remember, we also want to hear your thoughts too, so you can share your favorite parts of the chapter via email at drizzdoneright@gmail.com.
Or better yet, be part of the ongoing discussion on our very own Drizzt Done Right Discord. The Discord invitation is linked inside of the podcast description. If you manage to raise an interesting point, maybe bring you up on the show. Recently, our Dim Light Squad actually got into a really deep discussion over the appearance of the Drow, the biological ramifications of living underground, how maybe even oxygen levels could affect growth rates and more. I mean, Jaws had an in-depth discussion on how they were cave albinos who secondarily acquired the ability to capture hard radiation energy via pigment. And that's why our lack of UV light inside of the caves, they would have had to be taken from ulterior means. I was quite blown away from the science that popped up inside of our discussion. Yeah, I mean, you as our resident scientist host, I saw you had a little input, but what was your feeling on it?
Well, yeah, my thought when they said when he said that, it was just kind of it makes a lot more sense if Drow, having been surface elves, once they're exiled underground, the pigment in your skin, melanin, is activated from sunlight, and so it's without that, you would just be pale mole people, and
that would explain the pale white hair and the pinkish eyes that they had too. If you ever see the albino lab rat is the first thing I would always bring up in my head, or the mouse, the pink eyes with the bright white fur, the shock.
Yeah. I mean, that is technically genetic, being albinism, but I mean, at a certain point,
this is why you're the resident science guy.
But I mean, they just don't have the pigment is what it is. They just don't have any of it. So, I mean, at a certain point, would that happen? I don't know. So it's just interesting that they wound up with darker colored skin after being underground. And it's just interesting to see what our listeners have to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe he even cited the illustrated book that he had shown pictures of inside of our fan art and show and tell.
Right.
The link we have on the side. And they were showing off the book that they got. Beautiful book. The illustrations, gorgeous. Yeah. And I think they even shared. So if anybody actually wants to see the conclusion of that conversation and a little more in depth into what they went into, come check out that Discord. Again, the link is in the description of the episode anytime you want. Slaughterbanks even went on to bring up a really neat question about oxygen levels underground. Does the lack of oxygen have anything to do with more of their slight nature?
I mean, it would make a lot of sense.
But I mean, without going too far ahead, we do meet denizens of the Underdark that are not small and fragile in nature. Even the Grey Dwarves are short, and maybe a little thinner than their surface counterpart, but they wouldn't be considered slender.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think what it all comes down to is this is fantasy. And so
then it had me thinking of, again, skipping out to the Dragon Ball Z with the Super Saiyan training, where they go train it outside in space at a different altitude, so that when they then hit the surface, they were training, powers are magnified, muscles are stronger.
Well, yeah, there were a number of times where they were training under extreme gravity, and so then when they would get into normal gravity, it's a lot easier. I just love those moments in that show where Goku's fighting for episodes, and he's evenly matched, and then he's just and he takes off that lead shirt that he's wearing, and they're all the bad guys are oh.
I mean, what it boils down to is me, Justin. We love hearing you guys interact. We love being a part of it, and we love watching everything go on. I'm so happy to see the Dim Light Squad interacting with one another. You guys might have actually heard us a couple of times. We did mention the term House Nobles as well for our Dim Light Squad, right?
Yep.
So giving a shout out, I just wanted to give a special little shout out. Finally, the listeners of the show who join our Discord. That's our Dim Light Squad. It's our term we came up with to show affection to you guys. And then from that amazing crew, we've had a couple of individuals who've taken things even a step further. They really kind of take an interest in the progression of the show. They message me and Justin a lot. We try to, help steer the ship.
Yeah.
Little turns here and there make big waves, right?
Yep.
And for those people, I just wanted to point out our house nobles for you guys. They're the Trevor V, they're Scott S, Sevic Gray. Just wanted to name you guys formally and say thank you. I appreciate all your help and input.
Yeah.
So,
it's been great.
Justin, what's been going on, bud, between last episode and this episode?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty normal week for me, other than, we had St. Patrick's Day yesterday, so that was a lot of fun. Came home and Sarah had an Irish beef stew made up for dinner, and that was so good. It was like a stereotypical beef stew, like carrots and onions and, beef, but then it had like a whole can of Guinness in it. It was just
gives it a nice hearty flavor for that.
Yeah. So that was.
Now, did you
really
have?
good.
I know she makes the sourdough bread and stuff. Did you have a nice hearty bread to go with it?
We've unfortunately no. We've been pretty busy, and so she hasn't made her sourdough in a little over a week now. But if you guys have never tried sourdough, it's a commitment. it's another member of the household. It's this. You have this sourdough starter and you have to feed it every week. And, you take half of it to make your sourdough bread.
It's like an old school Tamagotchi.
Yeah.
Make sure you feed it, take care of it, water.
And you totally name it and everything. We named it Oscar. And so
Excellent.
So how about you, Jeffrey? How are things going?
Pretty good. I've been doing a lot of home enhancement, I guess is the thing to say.
Yeah.
So I got a cat gym essentially for the wall that I put up. It's got little cat houses on either side of the wall up top.
You're showing us all up, Jeffrey.
It was so much fun, bro. We saw it online. And originally I had it in my wish list right now for a couple of months, right? Like, I want to build one because you can buy them individually pieces.
Right.
And then going through that, I was like, I don't even know if they're going to like it. So I don't want to buy like a bunch of individual pieces and be stuck with something they're never going to use.
I don't know if this is going to come through or not. Shoot. No.
Oh,
you can kind of see it there, but there you go.
There it is. And, we saw this one online as a set piece. So we decided, we'll go ahead and splurge on the set piece. And if they don't like it, fine. Cats hate it. They don't want it. But essentially, it's like a little parkour kitty house for the wall. I went and drilled it all in, but it became like a 3-day process because you get everything.
Yep.
But I'm not ready to do it that day. So I prep it, put all the pieces together, put the screws in.
So you had to put it all together as well. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Just like it was IKEA furniture.
Woo! All right.
But not bad. I didn't have to drill holes or anything. It all came prefab.
Oh,
so
okay.
Slap it together, got it done. And then I realized that the molly bolts, it's what I call the drywall screws, aren't heavy enough. They're not sturdy enough to really take it. Because my cats are 12 and 10 pounds a piece. They're not heavy, but they're bigger.
Right.
So then next day, I go out to Lowe's and get myself some heavy duty 75-pound drywall anchor screws. So that, because, cats are going to jump on it together. They're going to pounce on it, run.
Yeah.
So finally got it strapped up and they're having a blast. And it's
awesome.
It's one of those things that it's just more fun for me to watch them.
Well,
than it is for them to be on it.
No, I'd be there all day just watching the cats play up there.
So I definitely told Elizabeth, it kind of makes you want to turn your whole house into like an American Ninja Cat Warrior. But you gotta rein it in, and hopefully it's a little set piece above the couch so that they can just run around and they like being up high.
Right. You don't want to get to the crazy cat lady area of things.
Not out the gate. You want to start, slow.
Start
and it's
slow.
like eventually I can build myself this weird Rube Goldberg machine looking thing where the cats never have to touch the ground again.
Swinging rope from one rope to another rope to the opposite side of the room.
Absolutely. Tripping over the dominoes, knock the bowling ball, get it ready to roll.
Nice. Opens up the tuna fish can. All right,
guys. Well, I appreciate y'all sticking with us. That's kind of just a wrap up of what we got going. How about now we go ahead and kick off the Drizzt of it? As you guys probably know by now, hopefully you've been listening long enough to get that the Drizzt is the part of this show where we're going to take a look at this week's chapter, give you the Drizzt of it.
Jeffrey, I just love that. It's not getting old.
No, I mean, I am forever a wordplay fanatic. Puns are fun for everybody. Even though the worst ones are still kind of chuckly.
Absolutely.
Cringy, but chuckly. So this chapter finds us, it starts off with the deception that ended the previous chapter. Drizzt is cornered Kelnaz in the barracks. They're surrounded by darkness, and their fellow students are passed out from exhaustion. Kelnaz, he kind of expected this confrontation because Drizzt naively asked about the rules of the engagement earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And it should have been clear that the only rule of existence is the pursuit of victory. He also knew that he was in no trouble really of being assaulted by Drizzt for his earlier actions because that's not really part of Drizzt's nature.
Right.
Kind of gauged him right out of the gate. Drizzt demanded to know why he'd been deceived out loud. Kelnaz met him with silence, just understanding that they were supposed to be asleep and punishment would be swift and harsh if they got caught. So Kelnaz, he actually turns around and replies with this hand code, which all I can think of is, American Sign Language. So I'm not even going to butcher it for those people who may know it in the video, but, just a quick little hand motions.
A-S-L.
Yes. Excellent. And it's just a way for them to communicate without actually being seen. And it was really cool because it's the heat from his hand as he moves it that picks up in the infravision and it gives Drizzt.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. You just imagine like how a sparkler looks in the dark. You're waving it around. You can spell things, but he's doing that with his hands.
Earlier, remember we talked about how he did it with his foot when he was drawing patterns.
Yeah.
I really love the small little intricacies that they throw in like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Kelnaz, he signs with his hand that he really acted as he had to. Perhaps maybe he should have actually waited a little longer and let Drizzt finish off a few more so he could have come in above third.
Mm-hmm.
Drizzt didn't understand. He said, to himself, fighting together, they could have been first and second. But Kelnaz knew it would have never been anything other than second for him because he'd never seen anyone with Drizzt's talent with swords.
Mm-hmm.
Drizzt was a little bit grumbly, and he's like, oh, well, not according to the masters. They ranked him 8th.
Right.
And so, Kelnaz points out, it's still 2 ahead of Bergenyon from House Bainray.
Which is like an accomplishment.
Because they're the ruling house of Benzo Berenson.
Yeah.
So Kelnaz, he's trying to placate Drizzt by saying that he shouldn't be envious of the higher standing because really it means that it's just more eyes on his back, more fights to be had, always trying to stave off assassination and treachery because, that's how Lolth rolls.
Mm-hmm.
But Drizzt couldn't even believe really that such treachery could exist, even though he just had a taste of it in the Grand Melee.
Yeah.
It's I talk about finding it really hard to learn the some lessons.
Right. He's a dense boy.
Well, in that regard, absolutely, because for him it's so alien of a concept to betray and hurt your own that he gets continually in shock that he's being betrayed and hurt.
Yeah.
So Drizzt thought that Bergenyon was the finest fighter he'd ever seen, in the tournament at least. Mm-hmm. He even points out that he had Kelnaz beat until Drizzt interceded on his behalf. Kelnaz won't be deterred. For all he cares, Bergenyon can go wash dishes because he's 3rd. While Bergenyon, the mighty Bergenyon, is ranked 10th. The blue light of a master's wand cannot be argued with.
I mean,
Drizzt thinks
it can be, but then you'll be met with a lightning bolt.
It's swiftly followed by the thunder that follows the lightning. Drizzt thinks that honor demands that there be rules of engagement, but Kelnaz says the only rules is that you may do whatever you can and whatever you can get away with. Since he won the encounter, he holds the higher rank, and really, it's the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was the only thing that mattered until the outline of the master and the threshold suddenly shows up, and they both quickly feign that they're asleep. Because remember, repercussions can be harsh and quick.
Yeah, we don't want a thunderbolt in the middle of the night.
So as they're feigning that sleep, Drizzt is left to drift off, really kind of pondering that maybe he and Kelnaz had never been friends at all. Next, we find ourselves with Alton and Massage as they discuss the achievement of Drizzt in the Grand Melee, coming in 8th, but possessing the prowess to come in first. Basically just like a matter of time. Mm-hmm. Alton doesn't care for the potential. He plans to end the life of the prized possession of House Do'Urden. His first target for revenge until Massage takes a moment to really remind him that he's not going to harm him. Alton accepted the invitation into House Hunet from Matron Sinife, which requires obedience, and he's going to have to wait just a little bit longer than the 2 centuries that have already passed because plans are in place, and Alton will not ruin them. Now, Matron Sinife was very, very specific about you will take no action.
You said 2 centuries, but I think you meant 2 decades.
Decades.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, 20 years. My bad. In show correctment.
No, it's just
no, you're absolutely right. I didn't even notice that I threw it out there. It's like, 2 millennia later.
Minor detail.
So Visage reminds Alton that Matron Cinefay is going to bring him all the revenge he could possibly desire, but if he does anything to jeopardize these plans, then he's going to find himself cast out and ostracized from House Hunnett, exposed as a murderous imposter, and receive every judgment allowable by the ruling council, which we've already really been given glimpses of, and it's quite a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Alton knew he was alone, and he'd have no real leg to stand on in this argument. He'd have to bow his head to move forward. So Alton has to be let in, at least, on the revenge plan so that he could survive these torturous years that are going to lay ahead of him while he takes no action. And that's where Visage really kind of feels he's got to be careful, because he wasn't told to keep anything from Alton. But, information kind of works on a need-to-know basis. So, like, if Matron Cinefay really wanted him to know, then maybe she should have told him. So Visage kind of settles on holding a carrot out in front of Alton by explaining that, House Do'Urden has grown very powerful and continues to grow to the point where it might really become a very real threat to all of the great houses. In fact, we did witness the fall of House Devere, which was perfectly executed with no obvious trail. Many of Menzoberranzan's nobles would rest easier if... And that's where he kind of lets it trail off, because he sees this glimmer in Alton's eyes, and he knows that he's bought his patience for now. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really, really cool moment, because he's kind of more using insinuation instead of intimidation. He's kind of just leaving an open-ended, not even really a threat, just like, this is where things go. Yeah. And you know that.
Yeah. So
he's really kind of controlling that conversation.
Yeah. Before you move on, when I was reading this section, I just was wondering, like, Alton says Alton is now, he's taken the place of the Faceless One. He now knows that House Do'Urden is the house that took out House Devere. Is it too late for him to go to the ruling council and be like, I am of House Devere. I'm a noble from House Devere, and like accuse them just like...
Well, I believe that it mentioned that earlier when in the conversation with Matron Cinefay, because they talked that so much time had already passed at this point that really
they wouldn't care.
The ruling council wouldn't even want to be. It would be more of a bother to them to be bothered,
right? Okay.
Than it would be to let things continue to go on, and maybe they would just silence them, and that's what they're kind of talking about,
right?
Where Alton realizes he has nowhere to turn, because if he loses the protection of House Hunnett, then he stands by himself, and all of that justice, the Drow justice, will come crashing down on him at once.
Yeah, but that was just like where my thought process went, because it's like, okay, yeah, he's kind of like relying on these people, but it's like, hey, like, is it too late? But I mean, yeah, over 2 decades have gone by.
Yeah, they've passed their statute of limitations on being able to call vengeance back upon House Do'Urden. So from here, we move on in a sort of like a time hop and see the first year of the Academy held many disappointments for Drizzt. So many of the dark realities of Drow society that Zach Nefane had only hinted of remained on the edges of his existence there. The speeches of the masters contained hate and mistrust in both hands. Truth really seemed ambiguous, logic was warped and twisted, but the only treachery Drizzt had ever faced firsthand, it all came at the hands of a Drow, which... It seems kind of obvious, right? Because he never really left the house until he came here. So how much interaction is he going to have besides the Drow, right?
Yeah. Other than like slaves in the house, but even then the slaves are not getting out of line.
Right. I mean, especially around him because he was a noble.
Right.
And then also, I mean, from his end, he was so low of a noble that he didn't really have any kind of designs to look, I imagine, a whole lot of people in the eyes to witness that stuff firsthand.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of like he was in a bubble.
Yeah. Which
so the physical training,
the
physical training left Drizzt in a far more comfortable place. The endless hours of drilling were something that he really was quite accustomed to. If he had come into this academy with any kind of a gap of talent between him and his classmates, then time had only helped in that gap widen. Mm-hmm. He looked beyond the master's knowledge to create his own methods that at least equaled but usually outdid the standard techniques. This progress continued to the point where Dynan actually began to grow uncomfortable, because at first he'd been proud to hear of the praise that was heaped upon Drizzt, but soon the realization began to settle in that Dynan was an elder boy, a title gained by the elimination of Nalfane. How long would it be until Drizzt began to ponder his own ascension? This jealousy invaded Drizzt's classmates, who did not miss the growing brilliance of his fighting dance and often wondered if they'd actually ever measure up to his whirling scimitars. The jealousy definitely highlighted the value of a partnership for Drizzt. So here at the Academy, and maybe linking further between their houses outside. So when the second Grand Melee came around, Drizzt found himself inundated with offers of partnership. And I thought this was really interesting because, it's kind of, I imagine like grade school, everybody's getting picked to go play dodgeball, and then you show up after having kicked a home run the year before, and everybody's like, ooh, you, except this is a deadly contest. Not this contest, but the life of Drow.
Yeah.
And all of the houses are trying to insinuate themselves in his best interest because being in his shadow is beneficial to so many other houses.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that even Kelnaz of House Kennefin, which might have been the most surprising, offered a partnership to Drizzt. He explained that he'd make the perfect partner because since he'd actually already betrayed Drizzt, he surely wouldn't be fool enough to try the same thing twice, right? Drizzt looked at Kelnaz in disbelief and said that if they were to find each other on the battlefield, only going to be as opponents. Then ironically, as luck would have it, the first victim that Drizzt would run across inside of the tournament grounds would be his former partner in the same corridor that they actually used the previous year. Drizzt could barely restrain himself from driving his weapon through Kelnaz's ribs, but was quickly off into the shadows to pick his way carefully around the course while the numbers dwindled down.
I loved that Kelnaz was his first victim.
Absolutely. And you get the idea that it was kind of like watching a kid in like his parents' clothing, as they're in the same exact place they started last year. And Kelnaz is so much of an amateur that he didn't pick a new place. He didn't pick a new defense. He was just kind of trying to like run the same thing back again because it worked so well, but it wasn't his idea. So he doesn't know why it works so well. So like Drizzt is just, looking back and sees this like guy standing over there completely helpless and dispatches him with ease. The arena was Drizzt's home. It's where he really felt most comfortable, but his reputation meant that he had to be extra careful for ambushes and hidden companions as he hunted. After a few hours passed, it came down to just Drizzt and Bourguignon. To the disbelief of Dinan, who stood up above with the other masters, Drizzt gave up all of his advantage by walking out in the middle of the battlefield and calling out Bourguignon, challenging him to a confrontation. He just walks out in the middle of this field, gives up all of his cover, basically like Kelnaz was earlier, and says, hey, here I am,
and
come and get it.
And Hatchnet's up there just like, what are you doing?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, Bourguignon actually starts making his way toward Drizzt with great stealth. And Hatchet can see it from up top, watching this all play out, and kind of thinks it's a foolish maneuver. That his lack of hubris has gotten him in a bad position. And Bourguignon decides to try to ambush him from behind. But Drizzt was expecting this and rolls to the side, using himself essentially as bait, as he ensnares the son of House Bainray and quickly ends the fight before it ever really begins to become champion in his second Grand Melee. So that potential they talked about earlier didn't really take that long. It was fulfilled right away in the second Grand Melee he goes into.
And then, how many more after that too?
Right. Well, I mean, it's neat because at this point you can almost hear like if this was a live action movie, the ominous music tones would pick up, right? Because then Master Hatchet, he turns and congratulates Dinan, but also takes a moment to remind him that elder boys should beware of second boys with such skills. So time would continue to march forward, and Drizzt would continue to find himself locked in the dance of his blades, practicing in all of his free hours and honing his craft into more of like a religious devotion. The scimitars became his only friends, the only things inside the academy that he could actually truly trust. He went on to win the Grand Melee again in his third year, and the one after that, even though many of the others at that point really began to conspire against him and try to team up, like he was worried about earlier. Didn't matter, still won it. So then the Masters decide that they're going to go ahead and put Drizzt for the next year in a Grand Melee 3 years ahead of his class.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yep. Thinking that, you know what, now we'll just fast forward him to these guys who are, almost near...
Try to challenge him.
Yeah, near the end of their time inside of the academy. It doesn't matter. He still wins that one as well.
Right.
The skill that Drizzt possessed defied the structure of the academy. Despite his prowess, his tenure would not be lessened. 10 years was nothing compared to the 30 years of training that a wizard would spend or that 50 years that a budding priestess would spend.
50.
And fighters actually, right? Just
50.
like inside of that lockdown academics.
Yeah. Shoo.
And then fighters, they even actually start younger than all the other ones. They begin at age 20, where wizards, they wait until 25, and then clerics wait until 40. So they take 50 years, don't start until they're 40, so you really don't get a lot of them before that first century turns.
Right. Shoo. I mean, like typical average human life is what, like low 80s, something like that?
Maybe a little lower, but right around that ballpark.
Yeah. And, yeah.
You still wouldn't have graduated being a priestess. You still have about another decade to go. So the first 4 years, they all focused on single combat. There was nothing they could teach Drizzt that Zaknafein had not already shown him. Afterwards, 2 more years are devoted to group fighting tactics with other warriors, and then the final 3 incorporate those tactics into warfare techniques, beside and against wizards and clerics. So really it takes them, you start with the single drow on drow combat, then you learn how to work as a group, your back to somebody else's back, multi attacks. Mm-hmm. And then they take a step to incorporate that into a battlefield. Now magic's going to be coming at you from all sides. How do you work when magic augments your group? How do you work against magic when it's being used to try to harm you? The final year of fighters training is actually split into 2 6-month sections. One is spent at Sorcerer, learning the basics of magic use, and the other 6 are spent in tutelage under the priestesses of Aractinolith. Yet, all the while, the rhetoric and the concepts that the Spider Queen held so dear remain in place. The Academy is a place of constant ambition and deceit, a breeding ground for the ravenous, consuming hunger for power that marks the life of all Drow.
Awesome. Awesome summary there, Jeffrey. Let's go ahead and talk about our favorite parts in the dim light reel. The dim light reel, that's where we cast darkness on our favorite parts of the chapter, and dim light, all of our favorite characters, events, descriptions, and more. For me, this week, my dim light it actually starts, a little further back toward the beginning of the chapter. Back when the Drow fighters are making their way down toward their second grand melee, right before Kelnaz asks to join Drizzt for the second time, R.A. Salvatore provided us with just a single paragraph showing how Dinan has been affected by Drizzt excelling in the academy. And so he describes Dinan as having a lot of pride, knowing that everyone is talking about his younger brother, Drizzt. But then Salvatore goes on, and he sort of offhandedly mentioned that, well, Dinan gained the title of Elder Boy by backstabbing Nalfane. Is Drizzt now eyeing the same title? Like, does he have his eye on that same title?
That's an interesting point when you consider, real quick, jumping in on it, that it shows his love of house, like where he's very proud to be a part of a house that has such majesty. Like earlier when he ran the bugbears off and he was mad because they didn't move. It's like, I am a House Do'Urden. We have strength. But also his inferiority at not being the person who shoulders that strength. When there's somebody else whose candle burns a bit brighter, he all of a sudden wants to just snuff it or worries about his own being snuffed in return. So it's like this constant state of anxiety, paranoia.
Well, when I read this, I didn't read it as Dinan actually having that feeling of Drizzt is going to try to kill me at some point. It just seemed like that to me when I read it. It was like, hey, R.A. Salvatore's just like reminding us, like, hey, look, like, remember that Dinan killed Nalfane to become Elder Boy. Wouldn't that be interesting if Drizzt did the same thing? Or, just like kind of put that out as a possibility. It didn't sound like, at that point anyway, that Dinan was thinking that might happen. At least that's how I interpreted it.
See, I was looking at it all from the beginning when they talk about how like assassinations are built into the whole way that Drow and the wealth. So it's like just to me, it was a neat snapshot of his psychology of Dinan.
So when I read this, I didn't actually read that there was any indication that there was something that Dinan was actually worried about. But Rather, Salvatore just wanted to kind of like point that out to the reader, like, hey, remember that? And at the time, it did, for me, it felt a little forced. It was just kind of like, why is he bringing that up right now? And then, you continue reading. So, he basically was just saying, like, Salvatore was basically just saying, like, hey, this would probably happen in any other Drow house. So, I mean, it already happened in House Do'Urden, and who would be more suspicious at this point, right? Who would be more suspicious of this kind of act than a person that already performed this act?
Right, right.
So I feel like at some point, we see by the end of the chapter, he does start to get those, kind of build up that anxiety of just like, wait, yeah, what is Drizzt doing? But
and not to get too far ahead of it, but it really is also there at that point, not necessarily his own conclusion he jumps to. Go ahead.
Right, yeah. So then Drizzt goes on to fight in the second grand melee. He lasts to the final 2, at which point Drizzt comes out. We read all about that. I just love it because Drizzt comes out and he's just taunting Bergenyon, just like, it's just us two. Come out here and fight honorably.
Almost like Gladiator, where he's got the hands up in my head, in the middle of the arena. Yeah.
And Hatchnet has some critical words for that, but then Bergenyon falls for the bait and runs right into Drizzt's trap. And Hatchnet's critique quickly switches from this kid is arrogant and reckless to basically warning Dinan, saying elder boys should beware second boys with such skill. It was like, ooh. And
yeah.
So this had to be my dim light this week because I didn't see that coming. Because like I said before, I sort of, it was like offhandedly mentioned. I read over it without really thinking about the implications of it.
It's like when you're driving, you pass a turn ahead sign, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, hold on.
There's a turn!
Yeah, right. Caught you a little off guard. I get you.
And so it was, once Hatchnet uttered those words, we got to see that seed planted in Dinan's mind. I mean, we didn't get to see his reaction to it, and so it's like, what is his reaction going to be? Like, the scene ended right after those words, but I just imagine Dinan sitting there watching, just like wide-eyed and just like, oh crap.
Yep. Well, no, that's a great example too of how, again, like the lore and the rhetoric is always being peppered at them, no matter their station in life or society. Like Dinan is a master of melee magther. Even being a master, Hatchnet's still there peppering him, and he's not doing it in a way where he's like, hey, Drizzt is coming for you.
Right.
He's just offhandedly throwing seeds out there like Johnny Appleseed, and then whole forests are growing behind him. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
And it's just so offhandedly part of who he is that this is what Drow do. They reinforce the concepts of that society from every angle of life as they go through it. And I find it so, I don't know, kind of fascinating because like Drizzt is, again, just diametrically opposed to that same indoctrination.
Yeah.
But everybody else just kind of puts their head down and grinds forward, just,
yeah,
like accepting the authoritarian rule above them. It's crazy. Yeah. It's really neat. So it's got to be a what do you call it? A society in there somewhere, critique or something like that. I don't
know. So Dinan is a master of melee magther, but is he a spellcaster? So did he go through Sorcerer?
Well, they all take time in Sorcerer. Even though
that's true,
they're fighters, because they learn the basic concepts of magic.
Okay.
So he's I believe he's the master of, or in the family of House Do'Urden of melee magther. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think he's the sorcerer. I think maybe Naufane would have been the family sorcerer because they were originally talking about sending Drizzt to replace the opening that was left from Naufane's death.
Right. But either way, Dinan is a master here at melee magther, so he could pretty easily make Drizzt's life a little harder, right?
Absolutely.
Like he could even come up with a plot to put Drizzt in some kind of deadly situation.
Repeatedly.
Yeah. So I guess Dinan could also have a chat with Drizzt, basically telling him like, hey, don't do anything stupid, but that doesn't seem like a very Drow thing to do. Of course, on the opposite side of all this, I feel like there is no world in which Drizzt would backstab Dinan. It's totally out of character. At least a backstab wouldn't make any sense. Of course, if Dinan comes at Drizzt, like, he's going to defend himself.
And he would gladly meet anybody in the ring of honor, essentially, to fight them in combat, not to the death.
Yeah.
Just in combat.
So, like, Drizzt just is not built like that. And if Dinan doesn't recognize that, then I'm just afraid that Dinan's going to do something dumb. I'm really afraid about what he's going to do. Yeah. He's going to think, like, he's going to start getting paranoid after all this. And so I'm excited to see where it goes. But at the same time, it's like, no, Dinan, no. Like, we don't need any more bad guys.
No, don't open that door.
All right. Well, that's my dim light for this week. Jeffrey, what do you have for us?
My dim light actually took place right at the start of the chapter. It's going to be Kelnaz and Drizzt. And I really love the look at how Drizzt is developing like this disassociation with his surroundings. Zaknafein warned us of the horrors that he was going to face if he went to the academy, but they were more of like vague concerns. The previous chapter gave Drizzt his first taste outside the home of the society he lives in. I guess technically the destruction of House Tekindui might have been his first lesson, but this is his first experience outside of the house under the guidance of society, where he's got other authoritarian figures who aren't in his family. The last chapter ended with Drizzt facing treachery from what he thought was a friend, and this chapter picks up with his accusations toward Kelnaz. The room is black around them, and the students were in their cots. They were asleep. They're exhausted from all of their endless duties of serving the older students. And Drizzt actually speaks out loud and says, "You've deceived me." I found it interesting that Kelnaz was ready for this interaction right away, like that he'd already guessed the nature of Drizzt early on, and he was right. Yeah. Drizzt is naive in the ways of the Drow.
Yeah, I mean, he totally had, like, I don't know, it was totally happening. Like, we knew it was gonna happen. It's just like, like Drizzt is like, like you said,
no,
so
it
naive.
Speaks towards what you were saying earlier. He's not looking to like kill Dinan because it would never, Dinan. It would never occur to him.
Yeah,
and Kelnaz, to his credit, sniffs it out right away. But I found it interesting because really in this interaction too, Kelnaz doesn't actually have any maliciousness. He's almost like possessed more of an honest interest at the lack of cunning in Drizzt.
Right.
For Kelnaz, his actions in the Grand Melee just made perfect sense. When there's an opening and you have an opportunity for advancement, you are Drow, you take it.
Yep.
Anything else, foreign concept. When Drizzt asked Kelnaz about the rules of engagement, it set off like almost alarm bells. So that even though he knew that Drizzt was easily a superior warrior, his innocence was actually an opening that he would be able to exploit. It's also interesting that even though Kelnaz knows Drizzt the superior Drow, he isn't worried about any of this confrontation because he, again, already has a read on Drizzt and knows that vengeance fueled by anger is not one of Drizzt's traits. So not only will he not assassinate his brother from behind, most likely, if something is done to slight his honor, he's not going to just rage out and slash down somebody out of viciousness, according to Kelnaz. Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Drizzt continues to press the issue with Kelnaz, demanding to know why he had been deceived, but he can't get an answer from the smug commoner of House Kenefin. Found that a neat little sideline, like you were saying earlier about how, the line coming out about, from R.A. Salvatore giving you that little throwaway early, and you didn't notice when it was like the completely blanked on it already, but I had that same feeling essentially when he throws that line in there for the smug commoner of House Kenefin. So it's like Kelnaz is doing all of this because it's the right thing to do and he's successful, but it's also a way that's rewarded him to the point where he has been able to do this to a noble of House Do'Urden, ninth strongest house of House Menzo Baron, or in Menzo Barons, and he feels good about this, peacocking a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's like, you know what? There's no way he's even going to assault me. I'll stand right here and talk. And he's just got that like clinician type interest in how Drizzt's mind works. And this moment's one of tension, but not from retribution, but from punishment. And the scene actually reminds me of my time in boot camp because like right away you get put with just people from different upbringings inside really of a pressure cooker that's just filled with emotions.
Yep.
You're going to have some disagreements. People aren't always going to get along. You're going to have a bad day and somebody else isn't going to want to hear it. Sometimes all the clamoring will build up eventually.
Right.
And you're going to have disagreements. There were times when you get up in the middle of the night on guard duty, or like we had, they would always have us out there buffing the floors to make them look shiny. And maybe you'd run into someone that you had a disagreement with because they had to get up and use the bathroom in the middle of the night. You know, you lock eyes in the hallway and you want to say some mean things because you're like, hey, my honor's been impeached. Let me go ahead and sully forth and have it out with you, sir. But you know that the conflict and the confrontation are there, but it's almost like a library because you're not allowed to actually say anything. You're not allowed to make a sound at all. Mm-hmm. Everybody's hushed on pins and needles. Like all the people sleeping around you are kind of like snoring landmines that you can't set off because the consequences would be severe. Like a real life version of Don't Wake Daddy, the board game. And Kelnaz isn't even worried about Drizzt. He's worried about the master overhearing them. So he switches to this Drow hand code, which we talked about earlier, and his heat from the fingers trace the patterns for Drizzt to see. And he starts talking to me. He says, what's the mystery, really? I mean, come on. I acted as I had to act, right? Maybe I should have held off a little bit longer. Perhaps if you defeated a few more, I might have finished higher than third in the class. And to Kelnaz, it's simple. It makes as much sense as breathing air. But Drizzt is still angry. You know, if we'd worked together as we agreed, you might have won or finished second at least. Right? I found this funny because Drizzt is kind of a little salty. You know, he's kind of hurt. Yeah. And he's trying to point out any kind of flaw he can do. We've all done this in an argument where, you know, you've been bested. And you're like, yeah, well, you can't tie your shoes. Whatever, you know, just barb you can toss at somebody. Right. So he's trying to poke holes in the logic. But Kelnaz ended up third. Really, what kind of difference is there if he comes in second? You know, knowing that he did nothing to actually enhance that. He just rode the coattails of Drizzt. He comes in third, but he earned that third by making smart decisions in his mind.
Yep.
So I don't think Kelnaz sees a world where he wouldn't have ended up betraying Drizzt. He was simply debating the most optimal moment to betray him and really how he could use it to his own advantage the best. Then Kelnaz really does this smart move, and he tries to placate the anger in Drizzt just in case he's wrong, I feel, you know? He says that he knew he'd never going to beat him. Drizzt is the finest swordman he's ever seen, but Drizzt is still in his feelings. He's grumbling about how the masters see it differently. And Kelnaz says, look, man, 8th isn't so bad. You know, there's Burgundion over there from the biggest house in Enzo Berenson, and he's 2 spots behind you.
Yeah, he got 10th.
He says Drizzt should be glad that his standing isn't envied by his classmates. Holding a higher rank only means that I have more fighters eyeing my back as a convenient place to rest their daggers. And speaking again to what you mentioned earlier, it's such a foreign concept for Drizzt to actually attack his brother. He's not even thinking about attacking the guy who attacked him.
Right.
He's still not even considering a world where he could see other Drow wanting to stab Kelnaz in the back.
Right.
So then Drizzt lashes out in kind of like a petty way, and he points out that, well, Burgundion was going to defeat you until I stepped in on your behalf. And Kelnaz, he lets his pride kind of show here, I feel. And he goes, let Burgundion serve as a cook in some lowly house for all I care. He is 10th, yet I, Kelnaz of Kennefin, am 3rd. Obviously, all in hand language. You know, maybe a little tension in the hand to make it glow brighter.
Right.
And Drizzt actually lets a little anger creep into him at this point because he points out that he's 8th and he can beat Kelnaz with any weapon he chooses. Like, go ahead, grab whatever you want now. I'll beat the brakes off you. And Kelnaz, he just shrugs, which I found interesting. They mention that to people who see an infravision, a shrug is really just a blurry image because your shoulders go up and down real quick, but it doesn't change much. You're just suddenly a little blurry. So it really doesn't have the same effect that it would, I believe, in, you know, human society where you just look over like, whatever, bro. But to Drow, I don't know. It's just kind of neat to see that difference in it.
Yeah.
And he says, look, I won the encounter. That's all that matters. And Drizzt gasps, and he's kind of like, well, you deceived me. That's all. You didn't win.
He's like, an encounter? What encounter?
Right. And then Kelnaz, because who's left standing? He pointedly reminds him. Who wore the blue light of a master's wand? It's kind of like that sports effigy where you're winning and the guy says something. You say, yeah, well, look at the scoreboard. What's it say? You know, remind me, does the higher score win? And Drizzt growls here. He says, honor demands that there be that there be rules of engagement. And then Kelnaz snaps back and he says, there is a rule. You may do whatever you want that you can get away with. I won our encounter, Drizzt Do'Urden, and I hold the higher rank, and that's all that matters. As his voice rises, they both notice a shadow in the door, and then they pretend to fall asleep. And the moment kind of rocks Drizzt with a bit of finality as he knows that their friendship's at an end. And he ponders if they had actually ever really been friends to begin with. It's Kelnaz tried to placate Drizzt a little earlier, and I think this is where Drizzt presses the issue. He sees a little bit of the true colors of Kelnaz coming through. His pride and his ranking is the most important thing to him. It doesn't matter what he did to get there. In fact, everything that he did to get there was actually justified in his mind because he'd achieved a rank higher than most would actually deem him worthy of. Drizzt possesses a code of honor that does not allow him to consider the actions of Kelnaz to be virtuous, so he never saw it coming. Luckily, this lesson is learned in school, and consequences aren't lethal because Menzo Berenzin has no place for softness and no place for weakness.
I was thinking the same exact thing. Like, this was the perfect time for Drizzt to learn this lesson.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
that's kind of why the Academy exists, right?
Right.
Even though it's vicious, like they're off book, they don't really get into it. But one of the trainings they do for a Drow is they drop these centipedes onto them. They're these biting centipedes.
That's right. Yeah.
It's kind of like if you've read Dune, it's the Gom Jabbar, where you have the threat of all this pain, except in this thing, they're sitting there naked meditating.
Yep.
And they get bit by these bugs,
They're
and
not
they
allowed to
have
react.
to maintain, right? No yelp, no move, no flinch.
Yep.
3 of those failures end up in you being kicked out of the school. So it's like, because their ability to meditate through anything really helps their class abilities and their fighter ability. And so they're trained super, super hard. But even in here, it's not a lethal consequence while they're going through the grand melee and the learning of how to fight inside the structure. They're given practice weapons and blue lights. It's really kind of a sci-fi Tron-y, a Tron type setting.
Well, very cool. Very good. All right, let's move on to our next segment of the show called the Dungeon Delve.
This is my pack walk, like I got a ruck on going in the dungeon. That's for all of you who are watching the YouTube. For those of you who are not watching the YouTube, do remember we are on video. I've got the little Ace Ventura slick and hair going up. We're just trying to give you guys a little something different so we can continue to engage back and forth and make this, our world a little more fun with y'all. Take us down, Justin.
The Dungeon Delve. It's the part of the show where we link this chapter with our favorite tabletop RPG. And this week, we saw a little bit of a time jump toward the end of this chapter. So after the second Grand Melee, I should say, it goes on to say, like, Drizzt's first 4 years at Melee Magthir were focused on singular combat training. And then there were 2 full years of learning group combat tactics. And then 3 years after that were group combat tactics with wizards and clerics in their teams as like involved in their fights as well. So my Dungeon Delve was initially going to actually be about group tactics in the game, because there are a few optional things that you can do that change around your group tactics and different strategies and everything, but I'll save that for a different time. I wanted to talk this time about time jumps. So
you blanked out a little bit there for a second. What are we talking about?
Time jumps.
Yeah.
Wait, did I block out on your side? Because I think, I should be fine on my side because I'm...
audio came through, and for me, it skipped a second. So I just want to make sure we got everybody where we need to be. That's all.
Yeah, I'm recording on my side, so we should be good. But
excellent.
If not, post-production. Awesome. So let's see. So I realized, there was just this huge time jump going on in the book, and it just made me think of how I ran a couple of my campaigns, and so I wanted to talk about that. So when I was first getting into D&D, this is now almost 10 years ago, I remember a friend describing the game to me as it's a game where something that takes hours is able to take seconds, and something that takes seconds can take hours.
I love that description, because having been in combat for one single prolonged combat, it can take forever.
Right. Yeah. So time jump to present day now.
Excellent.
And I still cannot agree more with my friend's statement. So like you said, encounters, they can last hours in our time, entire sessions, but maybe they were only a couple minutes long in the D&D world. And then at the same time, a long rest is hours long, but then like in the D&D world, it's hours long, but then in our world, it's seconds. Like it's awesome. It's weird. It can be really tough as a DM to keep track of time. That's one of the hardest things as a DM to keep track of, at least for me.
Do you have a sundial? Because I've seen a lot of DMs who will keep a rotating sundial to keep track of the what time it is outside.
I used to have a clock that I used that, but then it was like just another thing that I had to do. And so I'm just like, you guys walked from here to there. That would take, I don't know, 4 hours. And, I try to keep it fair, but it's not always consistent. So, these examples that I gave, the encounters and the long rest, these are just natural ways that our timeline doesn't line up with the timeline within the game. But you can also use time jumps to accelerate your story to get to the most interesting parts faster. So in this story, we read that Drizzt trained for 9 years. So again, 4 years in singular combat, 5 years with in groups. But that was real time for Drizzt.
Yep.
He lived those years. He would have met new people. He would have made new friends. He would have made new enemies. But for us, those details, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily lost to us. Like we just didn't get to be a part of them. But just
I'm smiling because it trips off as a fan of the 80s movies. It's a training montage, bro.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Need a montage.
Yep. I was thinking the same thing as I was writing this, and I wanted to work it in somewhere, but I forgot to. So yeah, these details they're not completely lost to us, because it's just like the fight scene last week when Drizzt and Burgundion were dancing for many minutes in the first Grand Melee. We got to fill in the gaps ourselves as the reader, which I really appreciate. And this as well, just like there's a lot of stuff. There's 9 years of Drizzt's life here where fan fiction, it leaves some room open, and or the comics. I know there's a lot of comics out there, and maybe they fill in the gaps here and stuff like that. So
that's a great point you bring up, because I really didn't even consider that. But yeah, our mind will kind of fill that in. And if you're, a reader who's been through, I don't know, a high school setting, any kind of structure, right? Mm-hmm. You're gonna start to fill that in with like, oh man, Drizzt was probably like, he was in detention one day because he didn't show up one time.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe he's just had to go eat lunch, and he's not at the cool kids table because all the Drow they pick on him and they won't let him play reindeer games.
He was first place in so many of the Grand Melees. So I mean, right there's going to be conflict, right? So.
Yeah, and so it's like it does, and your mind, I think, will automatically fill that in just a very personalized way. It's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. So it's these time jumps. It's a very cool thing that you can do in your D&D games as well. I mean, it more pertains to the DM, but hey, if you're a DM, think about adding them in, because I mean, well, I'll get into it here. So if you know that nothing major or nothing like interesting or nothing important is going to happen for a while within a given amount of time, go ahead, give it a flash forward. I like a good flash forward in my games. Not that I do them all the time, but moving from a major plot point to another major plot point can make for some great storytelling. I know in our current campaign, I actually did a prequel to our campaign that took place a few thousand years before our current campaign. That was cool. Yeah, like I gave you guys a chance to go through those events, live those events, rather than me just telling you what happened. What is Tahani doing?
For those of you who can see me on video, my cat Tahani has climbed onto the back of the chair and is rubbing her face off my headphones. She wants to be part of the show.
But you got to be on the YouTube if you want to see it. So.
Right? Then you can come see Tahani as she interacts with all of us on the YouTube channel.
I keep my doors shut so my dogs don't interfere, because Sam is always howling.
She's a good kitty cat. And all of a sudden, when she wants attention, though, she will come on up and demand it. And she's just rolling her head off my shoulder.
Yeah, so in our prequel campaign, it gave me a chance to go through all these major events that happened pretty much at the creation. It was a creation story of our universe. And And then once that basically, like those major events happened, it was like, okay, flash forward. Hey, everyone make new characters. I give them a quick briefing on how things have changed since. I actually let them be a little bit of a part of the, like, hey, what would your old character have done after all this has happened? So...
Well, then they become part of the history, too.
Right.
Of the story. They're the backdrop.
Yeah.
Or part of the structure of the backdrop that the current campaign takes place in.
Yep.
Love it.
And, of course, my current campaign is almost nothing like what I was planning because of the decisions you made in the prequel. But, it's still really
Dad's
cool.
ability to jump through random portals was one of the funnest things for me, because I couldn't imagine how on a storytelling concept you were able to keep anything together, because it'd be like, you guys go here.
Well,
you're seeing the beautiful forest. These things are happening. And Dad'd be like, I'm going to jump in the portal. See ya.
And I was like, oh, I don't have anything prepared on the other side of the portal.
But I feel too like that as a DM, that's kind of got to be what you love, is the ability to improvise on your toes. Because otherwise you're in the wrong profession.
Right. No, that's when I feel most alive. I mean, I'm really nervous when I first get into that, but once it gets going, I'm like, oh man, this is perfect. So that's one way that time jumps are really cool, setting up a campaign. But also another way that time jumps are useful or interesting is when players are traveling a very long distance, okay? Or if there's just a lot of time in between. So our most recent session actually involved our group trekking all the way from the far side of the Whispering Woods up to the Astral Observatory in the Gold Chill Mountains. This trek would normally take around a week and a half or even 2 weeks. So instead of rolling an encounter die every day to see what happened and then role-playing that out, I was just like, you know what? You guys are on the road for 2 weeks and, you run into some bad guys, you take them out, you have some quiet nights here. It's actually been raining a lot, and just kind of brief them on what has happened throughout that whole time. And then that allowed us to get to our destination quicker, which then allowed for a nice cliffhanger by the end of the episode and everything. It's really cool. So time jumps, they're an awesome tool for keeping your story interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, the pacing of a story, any story that you watch, whether you read it, whether you watch it, whether you are part of it, narrating it, pacing has a lot to do with it, especially as a guy here who has ADHD and I tend to fire through everything at rapid pace. Pacing holds a big part. And I think that, like, if you think about it as a movie, some things, you could just cut out, leave it on the cutting room floor.
Yep.
Like you're talking about, we traveled from point A to point B. Well, if there's no random encounter, there's no need to make us stop every 6 hours to, check on the sun's position in the sky, except to generate random encounters. So to move that apart until you get to a point where there is more of a meaty part of the story. Yeah. Sometimes it's more entertaining. I mean, sometimes you need the random interactions so that people can have a story spawn and, lore dump each other. But I agree. It's got, I think that's part of, from me looking in from the outside, really good DMs will know how to keep the pulse of a party moving, the pacing.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. What do you have for us this week, Jeffrey?
Well, my dungeon delve, I really like taking a interesting point of view sometimes like this. And I wanted to bring up traps.
Okay.
One of the things that I found really entertaining when it occurred in the fight between Drizzt and Bergenyon, Drizzt stood in the middle of the arena and used the perception of his naivety to trick Bergenyon into launching an ambush and falling right into the trap that Drizzt laid ahead of time. Tilt the battlefield in his favor and end it before it ever began. He used a tripwire. And the next thing you know, Bergenyon just bulls forward and he finds himself with Drizzt's scimitar right at his throat. He is forced to surrender. Nowhere to go from there. And I love the description on Roll20 where it says that traps can be found almost anywhere. One wrong step in an ancient tomb might trigger a series of scything blades, which cleave through armor and bone. The seemingly innocuous vines that hang over a cave, the entrance might grasp and choke anyone who pushes through them. A net hidden among the trees might drop on travelers who pass underneath. In a fantasy game, unwary adventurers can fall to their deaths, be burned alive, or fall under a fusillade of poisoned darts. I was like, man, that screams every Indiana Jones movie I've ever seen where he goes to hunt and you gotta disarm the traps. I love it. That description it's really cool. And a lot of times I always thought that traps were just something that you look for on a chest or on a door I'm about to open up
Right.
for a room that I need to get into.
But yeah, you can have
Or
like
maybe,
false floors and stuff like that. Like, yeah.
no, and that's the neat part too, because a lot of people don't look into or maybe consider is it could be something as innocuous as, like the tiles on a floor when you're skulking around.
Right.
But R.A. Salvatore shows us an example of Mr. Honey on my shoulder again. R.A. Salvatore shows us an example of how you can use traps to tilt the battlefield in your favor if you can catch your opponent unaware. Traps are either mechanical or magical. Mechanical
Okay, yep.
ones would be like pits, arrow traps, falling blocks, water-filled rooms, trip wires, anything that depends on a mechanism to operate.
Yeah. If you have the Dungeon Master Guide, there's a bunch of sample traps on page 122. Of course, like they go through steps on how to like make your own traps too. It's really cool.
Ooh,
yeah.
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I mean, the sample traps are just like you were saying, pits, poison darts. They even have a rolling sphere in here, and I'm like, Dr. Jones.
Gotta run from the boulder. Then they have magic traps, and those traps are either magical device traps or spell traps. Magical device traps initiate spell effects when activated, and spell traps are spells such as like glyphs of warding and symbols that function as traps. I kind of think of those shriekers, right? When they set those off in the first
yeah.
chapter or two, and then they had the glyphs and stuff that were busting up as flashes of light. That's kind of what I think was a magic trap. The glyphs and wardings that they were setting off,
I forgot about
trudging
that.
through. When you come across a trap, it's important to be able to detect and disable a trap. And that sounds really oversimplified, but depending on what kind of traps you run into, that's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Because if you're not able to detect the trap, you're going to end up just like Bergenjan, right? When he tripped up over the tripping wire. However, if he would have just stopped and checked for traps before rushing in all crazy, then he could have just possibly noticed the glint on the wire ahead of time and either avoided it or maybe disarmed it before attacking Drizzt.
Well, that was totally why Drizzt was taunting him, though. He wanted to get him to get unfocused, like he didn't want him to be moving too slowly.
You would think that would give him disadvantage if he was rolling for check, and he definitely failed it because he never saw it.
Yep.
But for realism's sake, he would have had to avoid. I mean, he's not going to just kind of sneak up and like snip the wire and disarm it.
Right.
This would be a case where he tried to avoid it and failed. Now, in the game, spotting the trap can be difficult. It could be an uneven flagstone in the bridge that you're about to cross, like you were pointing out earlier. Maybe a pressure plate's underneath of it. Maybe it's the glint of light off a tripwire, like we see with Drizzt and Bergenjan. Perhaps your passive perception will allow you to notice it. Then you can have an intelligence check to see if you know what needs to be done in order to disarm it. And then after that, you could actually do a dexterity check to see if you possess the skill or the tools necessary to get the job done. And this is where thieves' tools definitely help, because it's more of like a multifaceted Swiss Army knife of ways to pick locks. Not just lock picks, but it comes with several other tools you can find to try to disarm a trap or unlock a door. And then you have arcana checks that can be made if you're trying to disarm a magical trap. Or maybe you have a spell like Dispel Magic, which evidently will work in most times to disarm magical traps. Obviously, some things are inventive and find a way around it.
Right.
So traps can also be practically disarmed. And I kind of like this one, okay? Because this is if you come across a chest and you know it's got a trap in it, but you're not smart enough to know how to disarm it, or you don't have the right tools in order to do it.
Just trip it?
Yeah. So the example it gives is that in this scenario, you know that there's darts in the chest, right? But you can't get in there to do anything about it, or maybe you're just not skilled enough to do it. So what you do is you put a shield in front of yourself and the chest, and then you trigger it, just like kind of like bomb disposal, right? So all these darts come flying out, but they hit the shield. You're perfectly safe. Trap has been undone.
Long as they're coming from that direction. What if you didn't notice the one off to the right?
Well, then you did not effectively. So, I mean, this obviously would work better with darts than it would with something like fireball, right?
Right, yeah.
But maybe a poisonous gas, which like shoots out and swamps all around you. That's where it's important to know what type of trap you're dealing with, how to properly disarm it, and whether or not you can do the job. These things can all be, the combinations can be as endless as your imagination. In the game, traps are rated as setback, dangerous, and deadly.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that kind of cool because some can inconvenience you.
Right.
Some can cause you harm. Some may kill you.
May outright kill you. I would feel horrible as a DM if that's how someone went.
Oh, man. And I didn't think about it because I was like, well, what's it going to do to kill you? That seems kind of innocuous because you said earlier you can build traps, right?
Right.
But the damage range on traps goes from 1d10 to 24d10.
Oh, my word.
So you could create a trap that does 240 damage on a max roll, except, and I could be wrong here, if you max roll damage, doesn't it multiply again or no?
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay, because still, either way, 240 is enough to snuff out the life
of
many
of
characters.
Most, yeah. Now, statistically speaking.
Oh, yeah, the average would be in the middle, so you'd be about, if you roll 24, about 115.
Yeah. Yeah, you would have to have statistics on your side to roll max damage on that, but that would still really...
Good night.
That would kill a lot of level 1 characters altogether.
Oh, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them, because it's double the HP. So no matter what you roll with on level 1, I think you're getting snuffed.
Yeah, yep.
So then in yet another twist of fate, you can also have complex traps, which can work in stages.
Like a Rube Goldberg machine.
Yep, that's exactly what I thought of. So the trap itself is going to have an initiative roll, so it will take...
Oh, interesting.
I guess a turn of action as you progress through it. So every 6 seconds, not every 6 seconds per se, something would happen.
Right.
But it would have the opportunity to trigger or trip.
Interesting.
And I thought that was really cool because the effects can compound or they change as the round goes on. And the example that they gave was the flooded room from earlier, where water starts to come in and then it rises, and then maybe another that triggers another chute to open for water to come in at certain points, and it stacks till the room is full, and you either die or learn how to breathe underwater. I was like, now obviously, like you said with the Rube Goldberg machine, there are other ways to layer the complexity of the trap, and I thought that was just really neat. It comes I did the Goonies on Robert and Robin's radio, and it definitely reminded me of like running down with the boulders dropping at Data.
Yep.
So that is my dungeon delve. I found it kind of neat because, a lot went on in the chapter, but that little tripwire really let us kind of take a delve into traps, which are, man, it's a big part of D&D, because if you've never just walked down a road feeling like everything is good, to find out that you fell into a trap, it'll change the entire way you do your maneuvers from there on out. No longer will you walk in straight lines.
Yep.
No longer will you not care about the cobblestones. You will see danger everywhere.
Yep. Or at least you'll be looking for it everywhere. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it for this episode. So thank you all for listening. Remember that if you like the show, give us a 5-star rating. Also, make sure you are getting the most out of this podcast. Read along with us.
Now, let's get honest here, right? Sometimes maybe you bought a book and it's in French. Maybe you don't know how to read French. You can pick up an audiobook and actually listen to it in a language of your own choosing during your commute. Let the story take you away while you're at work. Listen to the words as you get motivated to crush those gains at the gym. You know what? Wherever you want. When you've listened to Chapter 13, go ahead, shoot us an email. Or, you know what? Come on into the Dim Light Squad. Join us in the discussion at the Drizzt Done Right, Done Right Discord channel. Or hey, you know what? Fire us an email at drizztdoneright@gmail.com. Remember, we'd love to hear from you.
All right, a French version of the book. If you do want French as your audiobook, that's fine. We don't know French, so we can't do the podcast in French.
Did, however, throw it out there. It seems rather innocuous, but when you look at our audience breakdown, Canada has worked itself into the second ranking.
They did.
As far as our largest audience percentage, they overtook Japan. And as everybody knows, in Canada, there's a lot of French Canadians. They speak a little French. I wanted to throw that little shout out to you.
I gotcha. Yeah, there you go. All right.
Layer and bricks they can't always see.
All right, it's been a blast, but now it's time to say goodbye.
You know what, though? Before we say goodbye, I want to remind all of y'all that we have a link in the episode description where you guys can go and donate to the show and help us speed up the growth of everything. We want to continue to grow the community, find ways to interact with you all more as we move forward. Your donations are never required, but they're definitely appreciated. Also, want to remind you that one of the things we're thinking about trying to do as this book wraps up and comes to an end to interact with our audience is doing a D&D one-off campaign. Gonna maybe get together anywhere between 5 and 12 people, maybe run a little campaign. If I build it up properly, maybe a few more than 12. But guys, come into the Discord. Join the link description in our description. And come give your ideas. Come let us know if you want to sign up. We'll start to get a rough build of where we're going and to kind of throw it out there since we've been going through the last 2 chapters. The setting that I have in mind is going to be a Grand Melee Challenge tournament to everybody who wants to come up. You guys are all going to be put into a big warehouse type setting, and we are going to fight for a prize. What prize will that be? The winner who stands left standing at the end, the Grand Melee Tournament champion? We're not going to tell you yet. You got to keep listening.
Oh, man, Jeffrey.
You know what? I don't want to give everything away all at once.
It's fine.
Reel them in slowly, right? Guys, come to the Facebook. Come to the Instagram. Join the Discord. We'll give you all the updates. We'll keep everything moving. You guys can take everything a step or 2 further if you want and get to meet one another. It's a blast.
It is a blast.
So, until then, guys, farewell. Play fair.